Something killed steak and ale, not the recession, not Outback or Applebee's. The real answer is its own founder, a man named Norman Brinker. He gave away three things that made steak and ale what it was. And by the time the third one walked out the door, there was nothing left to save. The thing about Brinker is that everything he touched in the restaurant business turned into something enormous. That instinct, that exact feel for what Americans wanted to eat and how they wanted to feel while eating it, is what made steak and ale possible. It's also the thing that eventually made steak and ale unnecessary. Brinker grew up on a 10-acre farm in Roswell, New Mexico. Only child. And he was one of those kids who just figured out how to make money out of whatever was sitting in front of him. He raised rabbits at 10 years old. He raised dogs and sold them. He ran a paper route he later described as 120 miles long, which, even if he was stretching that a little, tells you exactly who this guy was. He paid his own way through the New Mexico Military Institute, served 2 years in the Navy, and somewhere in the middle of all that, got good enough on a horse to make the United States Olympic riding team. He competed at the 1952 Summer Olympics in Helsinki, a farm kid from Roswell, riding for his country at the games. That's who Brinker was. Whatever was in front of him, he turned it into something bigger. And that exact quality is what makes this whole story end the way it does. After the Navy, he lands in San Diego, finishes college at San Diego State, and starts working for a guy named Robert O. Peterson at a little chain called Jack in the Box. Peterson became his mentor. Brinker later said everything he did in the restaurant business started with what he learned in that kitchen. Treat people right. Let ideas come from the people doing the work. Never stop watching your customers. Within 2 years, Brinker was the president of the whole company, with roughly a 20% ownership stake. While he was in San Diego, he married a woman named Maureen Connolly, known as Little Mo, one of the greatest tennis players who ever lived, the first woman to win all 4 Grand Slam titles in a single year. The farm kid from Roswell married an actual sports legend. They had 2 daughters together before Maureen died of ovarian cancer in 1969 at just 34 years old. That loss stayed with Brinker for the rest of his life. When Jack in the Box went public in the early 60s, Brinker cashed out and moved to Dallas. And this is where the real story starts. He opened a coffee shop first, called it Brink's, after himself, sold it after 2 years. And then, with the money from that sale, he did the thing that changed everything. February 26th, 1966. A corner in the Oak Lawn neighborhood of Dallas. The first steak and ale opens its doors. And here's what you have to understand about how the restaurant world worked before this place existed. If you wanted a steak in 1966, you had 2 options. Cook it yourself, or put on a jacket and go to a proper steakhouse where the bill would make your wallet flinch. There was nothing in between. The whole middle of the market, regular families who just wanted a nice night out without dressing up or draining the bank account, they had nowhere to go. Brinker built the place that didn't exist yet. He modeled it after an English inn. Low ceilings, stucco walls, wrought iron, lighting so dim you could barely read the menu. The whole place was designed to make you forget you were in a strip mall. And the menu itself was a show, printed on a butcher's cleaver that each server carried in a leather pouch. Prime rib ran about $6.45 in the mid-70s. Steak and lobster, $8.95. But the real thing, and this is the one that spread across the entire country, was the salad bar. Steak and Ale is widely credited with putting the self-serve salad bar on the map in American restaurants. And Brinker didn't do it because it sounded fancy. He did it because a steak takes time to cook, and he needed something to keep people happy while the kitchen worked. A practical fix to a timing problem that turned into one of the most copied ideas in the history of American dining. And the salad bar wasn't even the only thing. You know how a server walks up and says, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'll be your server tonight"? That started at Steak and Ale. Free soft drink refills. Value-priced lunch menus. Warm honey wheat bread with honey butter before the meal. Ideas that seem like they've been around forever. They haven't. One guy in Dallas came up with most of them in one restaurant. And within a few years, every one of those ideas was showing up in places Brinker had nothing to do with. The concept was loose. That's the first thing he gave away without realizing it. The whole idea. Brinker once told the Associated Press, "My goal is to wipe out dining room lights across the country." That was the whole trick. Right there. The darkness. Dim the lights low enough and a strip mall disappears. You're not eating dinner off a highway anymore. You're somewhere. And for 20 years, that worked perfectly. But the same darkness that made people feel special in 1972 was going to make them feel forgotten by 1995. The second location opened in '67. Houston, by May of '67. 13 restaurants across Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, and California by the end of '68. In states where the liquor laws didn't allow the word ale in a restaurant name, Brinker opened the exact same concept under a different name, the Jolly Ox. Same beams, same cleaver, same salad bar, different sign out front. Brinker took the company public in 1971 as S&A Restaurant Corporation, 28 locations. By 1976, there were roughly 109 steak and ales across the country. And that's the year Brinker sold. Remember this, because this is where the whole story splits in two. In 1976, Pillsbury bought Steak and Ale for roughly $100 million in a stock swap. Brinker got Pillsbury stock, an executive vice president title, and a seat on the board. He was rich, he was connected, and he was now operating inside one of the biggest food companies in America. This decision looked like a triumph at the time. A founder cashing out after 10 good years. Happens every day. But this one is the hinge that the rest of the story swings on. By the early '80s, the brand was big enough that a young Whitney Houston, before she was Whitney Houston, sang the jingle for a Steak and Ale television commercial. Unmistakably, Steak and Ale. The future biggest voice on the planet, singing for a chain restaurant that most people under 40 have never even heard of. But before I show you how it all comes apart, I want you to actually be inside one of these places for a minute. Because if you ever walk through those doors, you remember a feeling, and I want you back in it. You park in a strip mall lot next to a Sears or a movie theater. It's a Friday night, maybe your parents' anniversary, maybe a promotion, maybe one of those evenings where somebody just says, "You know what? Let's go somewhere nice." You pull that heavy door open, and the daylight disappears behind you. Inside, it's dark. On purpose. The ceiling has those old English beams running across it. There's stained glass catching what little light there is. A host seats you in a booth that feels like it was built into the wall of a castle. And a server walks up, tells you their name, and hands you a menu on a cleaver. You hit the salad bar while you wait. The bread comes out warm. And by the time that steak lands in front of you, sizzling, you feel like you're somewhere important, somewhere grown up, even if you're 12 and you're only there because your dad's birthday fell on a Tuesday. That was the whole trick. Brinker figured out how to make a $40 feeling cost $15. The atmosphere was doing half the work. You didn't just order dinner. You ordered the Kensington Club, a steak that had been marinating for up to 3 days, or the Hawaiian chicken, grilled with pineapple and a teriyaki glaze that people are still trying to recreate in their own kitchens 40 years later. And then you finished with the sautéed mushrooms on the side, the French onion soup, a second trip to the salad bar because nobody was going to stop you. I remember the first time I walked through those doors and genuinely could not believe how dark it was inside. It took your eyes a full 30 seconds to adjust. And by the time they did, you were already sitting down, already impressed, already feeling like this was a different kind of night. And if you're over 50, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you were there. First dates, graduation dinners, Friday nights when your parents got a babysitter, anniversaries where the waiter brought a little dessert with a candle in it and the whole section clapped. You probably had a favorite location and a favorite booth and a server who knew your family by name. And I'd bet you haven't thought about it in years. At its peak in the late 80s, there were 280 steak and ales across the country. 280. And here's something worth knowing about those restaurants. The managers who ran them didn't just stay in the system. They learned Brinker's whole playbook: how to run a dining room, how to make guests feel special, how to turn a concept into something people drove across town for. And then they went out and used it. Two of Brinker's general managers later founded Outback Steakhouse. Others fanned out across the restaurant industry, landing at chains you've absolutely eaten at. People called them Brinker's Brood. That's the second thing he gave away: the people who knew how to make it work. Now, while Brinker was still inside Pillsbury, he created another chain. This one was called Bennigan's. Irish pub theme, aimed at the young singles crowd, famous for the Monte Cristo sandwich and 2-for-1 happy hours. The two chains became corporate siblings under the same roof. In 1982, Pillsbury spun them both off into an independent company, S&A Restaurant Corporation. From that point forward, their fates were tied. But Brinker wasn't just managing someone else's restaurant division. He was watching everything. Which restaurants filled up, which ones didn't, what his managers took with them when they left. All of it was teaching him what the next version of casual dining looked like. And the next version didn't look like a Tudor castle with a cleaver menu. It looked simpler, brighter, louder, cheaper to build. So in 1983, he left. He walked away from steak and ale, from all of it. And he took over a tiny Dallas chain called Chili's. 23 restaurants, $35 million in sales. A speck compared to what he'd already built. And that's the third thing he gave away: himself. I mean, think about that for a second. The man who created steak and ale from nothing, sold it for $100 million, launched Bennigan's, and trained half the restaurant managers in America, left all of it behind for a 23-location burger joint. And because he'd already done this once before, he did it faster the second time. He poured everything into Chili's: the hospitality instincts, the atmosphere-first thinking, the management training system he'd created at Steak and Ale. All of it. By 1991, the company was renamed Brinker International. Chili's, Romano's Macaroni Grill, and a growing list of brands underneath. 1,600 locations across 28 countries. 62,000 employees at its height. So just sit with that for a second. The man who invented the sit-down steak dinner for the rest of us had left his original restaurant behind and put together an entire empire of competitors. And it wasn't just Brinker. Every one of those managers he'd trained, the Outback founders, the people shaping Applebee's and TGI Fridays and Ruby Tuesday, they were all running the exact same playbook. The one Brinker wrote at Steak and Ale. Against Steak and Ale. By the late 80s, the category Brinker had basically invented from nothing was so crowded, so saturated with chains selling affordable dinners in casual rooms, that the original couldn't breathe. The whole middle of the market he'd created was now wall-to-wall competition, and most of it had his fingerprints on it somewhere. If this is bringing it back for you, a like and a subscribe really does help us keep digging these up. That's it. Back to it. By the mid-90s, Steak and Ale was a restaurant from 1966, trying to survive in a world it had accidentally built. And the way it ended is going to happen faster than anyone inside those buildings ever saw coming. The dark Tudor rooms felt dated. The heavy steak and salad bar concept that had seemed so fresh in the 60s now looked tired next to the brighter, louder places that had sprung up on every corner. Chili's had a bar scene, and fajitas sizzling past your table. Outback had the bloomin' onion and a line out the door. Applebee's had a location in every town with a stoplight. All of them were selling the same basic promise Brinker had come up with, a nice meal in a casual place at a fair price. But they were doing it with newer buildings, bigger menus, and marketing budgets. Steak and ale just couldn't match. And the ownership was no help. After the spin-off in '82, Steak and Ale eventually landed under Metro Media Restaurant Group, and the reinvestment just stopped. The buildings got older. The menus sat still. The place that once made a Tuesday night feel special started looking like it hadn't been touched since the Carter administration. The darkness that used to make you feel like you were somewhere now just made the place feel old. And if you worked behind the counter during those years, you watched it happen in slow motion. The corporate office quit sending money for renovations. The stained glass got dusty, and nobody cleaned it. The booth upholstery started cracking, and the work order never came through. You'd been making people feel special in that room for 15 years, and now the room itself was telling them not to bother. That's not a business failing. That's a building being allowed to forget what it was. They tried to stop the bleeding. Steak and Ale rolled out an early evening value menu in the mid-90s. Lower prices, a free drink, a dessert, 25-cent wine samples. It didn't move the needle. When your competition is 100 restaurants that all borrowed your idea and updated it for the current decade, a cheaper price tag on the same tired room doesn't fix anything. And nobody working behind those counters had any idea that the end, when it came, was going to arrive in a single phone call on a Tuesday morning. And here's where the full weight of this story really sits. Norman Brinker, the man who started all of this, who created the original, who trained the people, who proved the whole concept, was across town running Brinker International, opening new Chili's at a pace that would have made his 1966 self dizzy. He wasn't watching Steak and Ale fade from some distance. He was actively putting up the restaurants that were making it irrelevant. And this is where all three come together. The concept was on every corner, in restaurants Brinker never touched. The people he'd trained were running the competition. And the founder himself was leading the charge. Three things that made Steak and Ale what it was. All three gone. All three pointed right back at the original. And it wasn't spite. That's the strange thing about it. Brinker wasn't trying to bury his first restaurant. He was just building the next thing. And the next thing happened to eat the first thing alive. That's not a villain story. That's just what happens when a good idea gets out of the room where somebody first thought of it. And then, on January 22nd, 1993, right in the middle of all of this, Brinker himself was nearly killed. A polo accident in Florida. A high-speed collision that left him with 32 broken bones, weeks in a coma, paralyzed on one side. He fought his way back to work within about 6 months, because that's just who he was. He wrote a book about it called On the Brink. He helped launch a major breast cancer foundation through his wife, Nancy. But the one person in the world who might have known how to save Steak and Ale was now putting himself back together. And by the time he retired from Brinker International in 2001, Steak and Ale was already too far gone. July 29th, 2008. A Tuesday. Metro Media Restaurant Group filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in the Eastern District of Texas, forced into involuntary liquidation by its lender. All 58 remaining Steak and Ale locations closed that same day. About 150 of its sister chain locations went down with them. The two chains Brinker created side by side, gone on the same morning. Staff found out by phone call. Some locations taped a single piece of paper to the front door. We are closed. Thank you. 42 years of birthdays and first dates and Friday night steaks, and the goodbye was a sheet of printer paper on a locked door. On June 9th, 2009, 6 days after his 78th birthday, Norman Brinker died of pneumonia while on vacation in Colorado Springs. He never saw Steak and Ale reopen, but the people who loved it never let go. A Facebook group called Steak and Ale's Comeback, started in 2013, has grown to nearly 55,000 members. And it's not just one of those like if you remember pages. People are posting real memories in there. The exact booth they sat in on a Friday in 1983. The server who knew their order by heart. The specific steak and ale where they had their rehearsal dinner. And the single most searched thing connected to steak and ale, even now, is the Hawaiian chicken recipe. Former employees have been sharing the original marinade for years. Soy sauce, sherry, unsweetened pineapple juice, red wine vinegar, sugar, and garlic. Copycat versions are all over the internet. People aren't just nostalgic for the restaurant. They're standing in their own kitchens trying to bring back the specific taste of a Tuesday night in 1984. But here's the part I didn't expect when I started looking into this. In 2015, a company called Legendary Restaurant Brands, run by Paul and Gwen Mangiameli, bought the Steak and Ale and Bennigan's names. After years of announced and delayed comebacks, the first new Steak and Ale finally opened on July 8, 2024, inside a hotel in Burnsville, Minnesota. The salad bar is back, the Cleaver menu is back, the prime rib and the Hawaiian chicken are back. Whether it sticks, whether you can bring back a feeling that only existed in a specific time and a specific place, that's the part nobody can answer yet. That original Steak and Ale, the dark beams and the stained glass and the warm bread, it's gone now. But for a while there, it was really something, wasn't it? A place that made a Tuesday night feel like an occasion, and then quietly disappeared while everyone was busy eating at the places it inspired. If you were there, you already know. So, which Steak and Ale was yours? What city? What year? What did you order? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more of these, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.